time for 911. Where's your emergency?
Oh,
What's the
send
problem?
the police! Send the police!
What's the problem there?
The chip killed my friend! The police up! With a gun! With a gun!
Suicide Bridge of Overton. In the town of Dumbarton, Scotland, a striking Gothic-style stone bridge, roughly 15 meters high and built back in 1895 during the height of the Victorian era, has earned a reputation far darker than its elegant architecture would suggest. Since sometime in the 1950s, researchers estimate that at least 600 dogs have leapt from the bridge's edge for no clear or consistent reason, with around 50 of those falls proving fatal, either instantly or from injuries suffered shortly after. Scientists and animal behaviorists have never fully settled on a single explanation, though a fairly consistent pattern has emerged over the decades of documented cases. Dogs with an unusually strong sense of smell seem noticeably more prone to jumping than others, and the vast majority of incidents happen at almost the exact same spot on the bridge between the final two parapets, and overwhelmingly on clear, sunny days rather than overcast or rainy ones. The pattern has become common enough that local authorities have posted permanent warning signs near the bridge, urging dog owners to keep their pets leashed at all times while crossing. Explanations offered by locals over the years have ranged wildly, from ghostly hauntings tied to the bridge's history to theories about sound frequencies audible only to canine ears. The most widely accepted scientific explanation, though, points to something far more grounded: the strong scent of mink living in the gorge directly below the bridge, a smell powerful enough to potentially trigger a dog's hunting instinct so intensely that it overrides any awareness of the very real drop waiting on the other side of the wall. The fish rain of Lloro, Honduras' sky mystery. Imagine walking outside after a violent storm and finding hundreds of fish scattered across the streets. This bizarre phenomenon, known as the rain of fish, has been reported for generations in Lloro, Honduras. It usually occurs between May and July when powerful storms bring intense winds and torrential rain. After the storm ends, locals claim to find dozens or even hundreds of small fish lying on the ground. But where do they come from? The most popular explanation involves waterspouts, powerful rotating columns of air capable of lifting small animals from bodies of water and carrying them through the atmosphere before releasing them. However, there's a problem. Lloro isn't directly beside a large ocean, and scientists have never conclusively proven that waterspouts are responsible. Some theories suggest the fish may come from underground waterways or nearby rivers that overflow during storms. Whatever the explanation, the strange phenomenon has made Lloro famous, and every time the storm clears and fish appear across the streets, one mystery remains. Did they really fall from the sky? Level 2, Mike the Headless Chicken. On September 10, 1945, a Colorado farmer named Lloyd Olson was doing the routine, unglamorous work of preparing chickens for market, working through the flock one bird at a time with a hatchet, as he'd done countless times before. One bird, a young rooster of the Wyandotte breed, barely 5 months old, didn't go down the way the rest had. The axe took off most of the animal's skull in a single stroke, the kind of blow that should have ended things instantly. Instead, the rooster simply got back up onto its feet and carried on as if nothing unusual had happened at all, wandering the yard, pecking at the ground, behaving for all the world like any other bird on the farm. Stunned, Olson made an unusual decision. Rather than finishing the job, he chose to keep the animal alive, feeding it a mixture of grain and water directly into its exposed esophagus using an eyedropper, since normal eating was no longer possible. Against every expectation, the rooster not only survived the days that followed, but kept surviving week after week. Word of the impossible bird eventually reached a showman named Hope Wade, who saw an opportunity where most people would have seen only tragedy. He arranged to take the rooster on tour as a sideshow attraction, charging curious onlookers 25 cents a look at what newspapers had started calling a miracle of survival. The exhibit proved wildly popular, pulling in roughly $4,500 a month at its peak, a sum worth something in the neighborhood of $50,000 in today's money. The bird lived on for 18 months in total, touring town to town before finally choking on built-up mucus during a night on the road in 1947, bringing an improbable and more than a little haunting chapter to a close. The Africanized bee. In the 1950s, as the field of genetics was advancing rapidly around the world, Brazilian geneticist Warwick Kerr set out on an ambitious breeding project, hoping to develop a hardier, more productive strain of honeybee suited to tropical conditions. His approach involved crossbreeding African queen bees with the European honeybee populations already established in Brazil, aiming to combine the heat tolerance and productivity of the African strain with the more manageable temperament of the European one. The experiment held together until 1957, when a lapse in laboratory containment allowed 26 swarms of the African queen bees to escape into the surrounding Brazilian wilderness. Once free, they interbred rapidly and extensively with local bee populations, giving rise to an entirely new hybrid strain that would come to be known as the Africanized honeybee. The resulting insect proved to be extraordinarily aggressive, fiercely territorial, and remarkably successful at expanding its range across South, Central, and eventually North America over the following decades. In the years since, the Africanized honeybee has been linked to the deaths of countless domestic animals and more than 1,000 human beings, with victims sometimes chased for distances exceeding a full kilometer before being overwhelmed by mass, coordinated stinging attacks that no single bee sting could account for on its own. What began as a well-intentioned effort to improve honey production instead created one of the more consequential invasive species of the modern era, a lasting reminder of how quickly a controlled experiment can spiral entirely out of anyone's hands once it escapes the lab. Level 3. Amphibians in the aisles, the frog in a salad scandal. Grocery chains around the world, Tesco in the UK, Walmart in the United States, and plenty of others besides have faced their share of embarrassing headlines over the years, usually thanks to ordinary shoppers finding something alive where it very much shouldn't have been. Bagged salad and pre-washed produce have been a recurring culprit, since the industrial process of harvesting greens in bulk doesn't always catch what's hiding among the leaves before the bag gets sealed and shipped to a store shelf. Amphibians in particular have turned up more than once inside sealed packaging, tucked between lettuce leaves through the entire journey from farm to refrigerator. In one especially alarming case, a customer opened a bag of prepared salad greens at home, only to find a live frog curled up inside, apparently having survived the wash cycle, the packaging line, and the refrigerated truck ride to the store. What made the story spread as far as it did wasn't just the shock of finding a live animal in your dinner, it was what came after. The species was eventually identified as one known to secrete a genuinely toxic substance through its skin, the kind of defense mechanism that handled or eaten without knowing could have turned a strange grocery store mishap into a real medical emergency, rather than just an unsettling story to tell afterward. Mary the elephant. In 1916, Mary, a 5-ton Asian elephant, stood as the star attraction of the Sparks world-famous show's circus. Renowned across the towns it visited for her surprising ability to play musical instruments and perform a range of complicated tricks that drew large crowds wherever the show set up. On September 12th, during a tour stop in Kingsport, Tennessee, a newly hired and largely inexperienced handler named Walter "Red" Eldridge was leading Mary toward a nearby pond as part of the routine. Along the way, Mary became distracted, reaching down toward a piece of watermelon rind lying on the ground. Frustrated, Eldridge struck her on the head with a metal-tipped handling hook, and Mary reacted instantly and violently, seizing him with her trunk and killing him almost immediately. The surrounding crowd, having just watched a man die in front of them, quickly turned into an enraged mob, demanding the elephant be put down on the spot. A local blacksmith even attempted to shoot her with a pistol, though the bullets did little more than irritate her thick hide. In the days that followed, neighboring towns along the circus's planned route refused to allow the show to perform unless Mary was executed first, leaving the circus's owner, Charlie Sparks, facing the very real possibility of financial ruin if he didn't comply. On September 13, 1916, Sparks made the decision to carry out a public execution of the elephant. The circus transported Mary to a nearby rail yard equipped with an industrial crane rated for up to 10 tons, more than enough to lift her substantial weight. More than 2,500 people gathered in the rain to witness the spectacle firsthand. On the first attempt, handlers fastened a chain around her neck and began to lift her, but the chain snapped under the strain, sending Mary crashing back to the ground and fracturing her hip in the fall. Rather than reconsidering the plan, the crew simply replaced the broken chain with a heavier, stronger one and made a second attempt. This time it held, and Mary was left hanging, dying slowly over the course of several minutes before the ordeal finally ended. To this day, the incident is remembered by many historians as one of the darkest chapters in the history of American circus entertainment and animal treatment more broadly. Level 4. The Man-Eaters of Tsavo. In 1898, thousands of workers were building a railway bridge over the Tsavo River in Kenya. Then people started disappearing. At first, everyone thought the workers had simply wandered away. But soon, the truth became impossible to ignore. 2 male lions had begun entering the camp at night. They would sneak past the guards, grab sleeping workers from their tents, and drag them into the darkness. By morning, there was often nothing left but blood and scattered remains. The workers were terrified. Some stopped sleeping altogether. Others built thorn fences around their camps, hoping they could keep the lions out. But the attacks continued. The two lions became known as the man-eaters of Tsavo, and for months, they seemed almost impossible to stop. Eventually, railway engineer and hunter John Henry Patterson was ordered to deal with them. He spent months tracking the predators, setting traps and waiting through the night. Finally, in December 1898, Patterson shot the first lion. A few weeks later, he killed the second. The attacks immediately stopped, but the mystery surrounding the lions didn't. Why had they started hunting humans? One explanation came from scientists who later examined their remains. One of the lions had severe dental damage, which may have made hunting difficult. Humans were simply easier prey. Whatever the reason, two lions had managed to turn an entire railway camp into a place of terror, and their story became one of the most infamous examples of man-eating predators in history. Level 5. The Beast of Gévaudan. Between 1764 and 1767, something was hunting people in the French province of Gévaudan, and it wasn't acting like an ordinary wolf. Victims were found horribly mutilated, often with their heads and throats attacked first. Some people were killed in broad daylight, sometimes even while others were nearby. Soon stories about a gigantic creature began spreading. Witnesses described a beast larger than a normal wolf, with reddish fur, a dark stripe along its back, huge jaws, and a long tail. Fear took over the region. People stopped traveling alone. Farmers carried weapons into the fields. Eventually, King Louis XV sent soldiers and hunters to find the creature, but the beast seemed impossible to catch. Hundreds of hunters searched the countryside, yet the attacks continued. Then, in 1767, a local hunter named Jean Chastel shot and killed a large animal during a hunt. Inside its stomach, investigators reportedly found human remains. The attacks stopped soon afterward. But here's where the story gets strange. No one has ever proved exactly what the Beast of Gévaudan really was. Some believe it was simply an unusually large wolf or wolf-like animal. Others have suggested a hyena, a hybrid, or even an exotic animal brought into France. The darkest theory claims that the beast may have been deliberately trained by a human to attack people. More than 2 centuries later, we still don't know the truth. But one thing is certain. The Beast of Gévaudan became one of the most terrifying animal legends in European history. Gustave the crocodile. Along the rivers of Burundi in East Africa lives, or at least lived, as far as anyone can confirm, an enormous Nile crocodile known locally as Gustave, measured at more than 6 meters in length and weighing over a full ton, roughly double the size of an average adult Nile crocodile. Believed to be somewhere between 60 and 80 years old, Gustave has spent decades hunting people along the riverbanks he frequents, with children among his most frequent victims. Researchers who study him estimate that he's personally responsible for the deaths of more than 300 people over the course of his long life. What unsettles the biologists who've tracked and studied his behavior most isn't simply the scale of the killing, but its underlying pattern. Gustave doesn't confine himself to a single, defined hunting territory the way most crocodiles do, ranging instead across a wider stretch of river than typical for the species, and in many cases he kills victims without actually eating them afterward, a detail that suggests behavior driven by something closer to territorial dominance and aggression than by simple hunger. His last confirmed sighting came in 2015, and whether he's still alive today remains genuinely unknown, a lingering uncertainty that continues to unsettle the communities living along his old hunting grounds. Level 6. Travis the chimp. At first, Travis didn't seem like a dangerous animal. He had been raised by humans from just a few days old and was treated more like a member of the family than a wild chimpanzee. He ate at the table, wore clothes, used the bathroom, and even knew how to operate a car. But on February 16, 2009, everything changed. Travis suddenly became agitated. His owner, Sandra Harold, gave him medication to calm him down. Then her friend, Charla Nash, arrived at the house. Within moments, Travis attacked. What followed was so violent that Sandra called 911 while screaming for help. She told the operator that Travis was attacking her friend and begged police to shoot him. When officers arrived, Travis charged toward them. Officer Frank Schiaffari fired several shots. Travis ran back toward the house, where he eventually died from his wounds. Charla Nash survived the attack, but suffered devastating injuries to her face and hands and permanently lost her eyesight. The case shocked the world because Travis had spent most of his life living like a human. but he was never actually human. He was a chimpanzee, a powerful wild animal capable of extraordinary strength. And that tragic day became a brutal reminder that no matter how tame a wild animal may appear, its instincts can never truly be domesticated. Tilikum was one of the most famous orcas ever kept in captivity. He was captured near Iceland as a young animal and separated from his family. Years later, he would become responsible for 3 human deaths. The first happened in 1991 at Sealand of the Pacific in Canada. A young trainer named Kelty Byrne accidentally fell into Tilikum's pool. The orca and 2 other whales repeatedly pulled her underwater. She eventually drowned. Tilikum was later transferred to SeaWorld Orlando. For years, he performed for crowds and became one of the park's biggest attractions. Then, in 1999, a man's body was discovered lying across Tilikum's back after the park had closed. The circumstances surrounding his death were unusual, and investigators determined that he had drowned. Then came the most infamous incident. In 2010, SeaWorld trainer Dawn Brancheau was performing with Tilikum after a show when the orca suddenly grabbed her and pulled her into the water. Despite efforts to intervene, she could not be rescued in time. She died from drowning and traumatic injuries. After 3 human deaths, Tilikum became the center of an international debate over keeping highly intelligent orcas in captivity. He continued performing for several more years before dying in 2017. His story wasn't simply about a dangerous animal. It also raised a disturbing question. What happens when an intelligent, social predator is taken from the ocean and forced to live in a tank for decades? The man-eating elephant of Assam. In the Indian state of Assam, between roughly 2004 and 2006, residents across the region began speaking with growing alarm about a single rogue elephant responsible for a sustained campaign of destruction, tearing through dozens of homes and ultimately linked to at least 27 human deaths over the course of its rampage. What unsettled people most about this particular animal wasn't just the death toll, but its apparent cunning. Witnesses described attacks that seemed calculated rather than random, as though the elephant had learned to plan its raids for maximum effect. The Assam state government eventually made the extreme decision to formally classify it as a threat that had to be eliminated. In December of 2006, a hunter shot and killed an elephant near a tea plantation in the Sonitpur district, though officials were never able to fully confirm whether it was actually the same animal responsible for the earlier attacks. Level 7 China's Bedbug War. In the mid-20th century, China faced a massive problem that was hiding inside homes, dormitories, and public buildings: bedbugs. The infestation became so widespread that authorities launched aggressive campaigns to eliminate them. Homes were cleaned, bedding was boiled, cracks were sealed, and powerful insecticides were used to wipe out the parasites. And for a while, it seemed to work. But then something went horribly wrong. Some of the chemicals being used were extremely toxic. As people repeatedly sprayed them inside poorly ventilated homes, exposure began putting their own lives at risk. What was supposed to protect people from tiny, blood-sucking insects was creating a far more dangerous threat. The episode became a disturbing example of how a public health campaign can turn deadly when dangerous chemicals are used without adequate control. The bedbugs were the enemy. But in some cases, the cure became even more dangerous than the infestation itself. Universe 25. What happens when you give animals everything they could possibly want? In 1968, American researcher John B. Calhoun created an experiment called Universe 25. He built an enclosed habitat for mice with unlimited food, water, nesting material, and protection from predators. At first, it looked like paradise. The mice reproduced rapidly, and the population grew. But as their numbers increased, something disturbing happened. The mice began displaying abnormal social behavior. Fighting became common. Some mothers abandoned or attacked their young. Others became withdrawn and stopped participating in normal social activities. Eventually, reproduction began to collapse. A strange group of males appeared that seemed uninterested in fighting, mating, or establishing territory. They mostly ate, slept, and groomed themselves. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. Even though food and water were still available, the population continued to decline. Eventually, no new mice were being born. The colony died out. Calhoun described the phenomenon as a behavioral sink, arguing that extreme social crowding and the breakdown of normal social roles had contributed to the collapse. The experiment became famous because of its disturbing implication. A population can have everything it needs to survive physically and still collapse when its social structure breaks down. But there's an important catch. Universe 25 involved mice living in an artificial enclosure, so its results cannot simply be applied to humans. The Sankabetsu bear incident. In December 1915, on the remote Japanese island of Hokkaido, a massive Usuri brown bear, weighing more than 340 kilograms and standing nearly 2.7 meters tall on its hind legs, carried out what remains one of the deadliest bear attacks ever recorded. The animal first appeared near the farming village of Sankabetsu, simply looking to steal corn from local fields, a fairly ordinary act of opportunistic foraging. When villagers spotted it, they opened fire, wounding but failing to kill it. Rather than fleeing the area the way most wounded animals would, the bear instead seemed to return with something closer to deliberate intent. On December 9th, it broke into the home of the Ota family while the father of the household was out working in the fields, killing both his wife and infant child inside the house. When neighbors rushed over after hearing the family's screams, all they found were trails of blood leading off into the surrounding forest, and later, buried beneath the snow, the woman's body apparently hidden there by the bear, the way a predator might cache food for later. The following day, the men of the village organized an armed watch specifically to guard the damaged Oda household against a possible return visit. Sensing this, or simply moving on from a now-defended target, the bear instead broke into a different, nearby house belonging to the Mickey family, smashing it through a window and knocking over an oil lamp to plunge the room into darkness before launching a frenzied, close-quarters attack. In the chaos that followed, it killed 5 people and injured 3 more, most of them women and children who had sought shelter inside. Faced with the scale of what had happened, the Japanese government mobilized more than 600 soldiers, guards, and hunters to track the animal down. Finally, on December 14, 1915, an experienced local hunter named Yamamoto Heikichi located the bear and killed it with 2 precisely placed shots, one to the heart and one to the head, bringing the attacks to an end.